2 years ago, one of our members adopted a black baby boy, and she gave me permission to share this story today. This summer, we spoke about the racial tensions that have surfaced in the past year, and she told me that she has been concerned about how she, a white Jewish woman, could prepare her black Jewish son for the realities that he will face. So she asked a black male colleague, a vice president of her company, for advice. And he told her, when your son takes a picture for his driver's license, he needs to look as conservative as possible. Haircut, button-down shirt. Because when he gets pulled over by the police, and he will, that will be the first picture that they see. And he told her to teach her son to smile, because people are scared of angry black men. But he warned, don't teach her to smile too wide, because black men who look too happy also look suspicious. Calm, collected, he needs a half smile. With tears in her eyes, she asked me, how do I teach my child to have a half smile? It's a heartbreaking story, isn't it? Her story broke my heart because I know what I want for my own children. To think that my children would be unable to become their full selves, unable to express themselves, their joys, their pain, their sadness. I imagine my children fearing how people see them and judge them, not by the content of their character, but by the color of their skin. Frederick Douglass once said that the work of equality does not end with the abolition of slavery. It's been over 150 years since the Emancipation Proclamation and the freedom given to American slaves. Systemic inequalities and racism did not end with the Civil War. Frederick Douglass was right. Old hatreds die hard. As we know, Temple's own Rabbi Lefkowitz fought against the KKK in the 1920s. In state after state, including in Texas, restrictive legislation regarding segregation, intermarriage, land ownership, and voting rights dominated the American landscape. From Brown versus the Board of Education, to Rosa Parks, to sit-ins and marches, every aspect of the civil rights movement leading up to the Civil Rights Act was geared towards righting these wrongs. Rabbi Levi Olin was deeply involved in the civil rights movement. He housed freedom riders and marched with Martin Luther King Jr. Clearly, the passage of the Civil Rights Act did not mark the end of the journey either. Because 239 years after the founding of our country and 150 years after the Civil War, 50 years after the Selma to Montgomery March, and nearing the end of our country's first black president, we find ourselves in this pivotal moment. Whether it was the massacre at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, or the black lives that had been lost in Ferguson, Missouri, Staten Island, New York, Baltimore, Maryland, and Waller County, Texas, this year has highlighted for us how far we have to go. Racism is like a parched forest. When a match is lit, there is enough fuel for a powerful and destructive fire. For too long, we have permitted people to be humiliated because of the color of their skin. We've underfunded education and job training programs. We have invested more in white areas of town than black areas of town. We've applied the law in unequal ways. And we've allowed our criminal justice system to imprison black men at rates that are outrageously unbalanced with the same crimes committed by white men. Prejudice ultimately ends in violent catastrophe. Haven't we had enough? Enough of the cultural conditions that define who is beautiful, leaving out minority populations? Enough of the systemic and structural conditions that perpetuate pain through economic injustice? Enough of the painful and tragic breakouts of racism that have ended in death? Don't we want our children to grow up in a world where the images we've been seeing this year and the racial inequalities that continue to plague our countries are a thing of history books and not tomorrow's news? Don't we want all of our children to grow up feeling safe enough to smile? In moments like these, we often turn to the heroes of our tradition, seeking inspiration and hope. Among the greatest is our prophet Elijah. He is the harbinger of the Messiah. He restores faith. He punishes the wicked. He inspires goodness. And during our Passover Seder, he enters our homes as a guest, mysteriously drinking wine from a special glass. In one of the most well-known Elijah stories, the wicked Queen Jezebel is enraged that Elijah challenges her authority, so she threatens to kill him. And Elijah flees to the south to Mount Horeb. He hides in a cave, alone and scared. God instructs Elijah to come out of the cave and to stand upon the mountain. And then we read, "There was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains and shattering rocks, but Adonai was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but Adonai was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire, but Adonai was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still, small voice." The courage it took to step out of the cave is a decisive moment in this story. Elijah could have stayed confined within the cocoon of what he knows, but instead Elijah steps out to face the violent wind, the shattering earthquake, and the consuming fire. And because he did, he heard the still, small voice calling to his soul. Martin Luther King once said that the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Like Elijah, we all have a tendency to draw back into the cave of comfort and place blinders on our eyes. We are all drawn to the security of what we know. But during the Yamim Noraim, these days of awe, the piercing cry of the shofar calls to us, demands of us to open our hearts and our souls to the burning realities of our world. The potential for change is right before us. The potential for moral imagination is right before us. The shofar beckons us to come out of our cave and to come face to face with ourselves, with our community, and our Creator. To have imagination and courage, but it's hard. It's hard because within the cave we find great comfort. From the time that I opened my eyes, I've been in a white Jewish world. From the hospital in which I was born, which my grandfather founded, to the hired help I've consistently received this subtle message. Growing up in Denver, I went to a private school, and at the school, most of the black children, though not all, were on scholarship. It was evident through clothes and shoes and after-school activities. And at the public high school that I attended, the honors and AP classes were also essentially white. And my neighborhood was largely white. So in college, feeling sheltered, I decided to get involved in organizations that had a little more diversity than I had previously experienced. And I remember talking to a black friend of mine who was upset after he had gone into a store wearing a hooded sweatshirt, and he had been followed by security. And he told me that it was nothing new. Really, I said? That happens like more than once? And I remember the silence and his glare of love and frustration. And it clicked in my head in a way that it hadn't before. For me, racism had been about racist people acting in immoral ways. And as a moral, upstanding person, I wasn't racist. Clearly, I'm not advocating for a wider America. I wasn't the store clerk calling security to follow a black patron simply because of the color of his skin or what he was wearing. But in that exchange, my eyes were opened to something profound. I'm white. I've lived with many privileges. And even though my Jewish family has worked hard for what we have, I really don't know what it's like to be a black man. As stigmatized and as targeted as we may have been throughout Jewish history, being a white Jewish man in the United States, I've become accustomed to many privileges. And in fact, I became comfortable overlooking the subtle and not so subtle ways that they have shaped me. Living in a cave can be comfortable. And that's precisely why conversations about racism are difficult and don't resolve our problems quickly. 12 years ago at the season, Rabbi Stern challenged us to face this very issue, saying, the conversation demands that we hold up a mirror to ourselves because it requires us to examine how we classify others. It is difficult because it touches on some of the most controversial questions of individual and social responsibility. For example, why is it that some groups have not climbed the American ladder of opportunity with the same success as others? The conversation is difficult because though we have come a long way, the less obvious, more entrenched vestiges of injustice and fear have proved harder to overcome. Temple has a long tradition of facing racism. We know that this is not something that is addressed in any single decade, in any single sermon, or any single march. It requires the hard work of returning back to ourselves and to the evolving realities of American life, knowing that there are no shortcuts or easy answers. At this critical juncture, we invite you to join in that work. This year's Shema Manual will be discussing big questions about how we are living our lives and how we are making personal changes in the year to come. With members, we will be discussing questions like, why bother? What advantages do you have? What do we choose to ignore? For a taste of the small group experiences, come to our Yom Kippur conversation, 12:30 on Yom Kippur Day. We will have matching events to form new Shema groups in November. And Just Congregations is beginning to work with black churches in South Dallas and Hispanic churches in East Dallas to have conversations across lines of race and class. If these matters are important to you, if your heart was broken in what you saw this year, then I encourage you to go to the Temple website under the Repairing the World tab, and you'll find Just Congregations, and let us know that you want to get involved. Sign up. Our leaders will follow up with you. Finally, our rabbis and congregants recently participated in a march from Selma to Washington, D.C. this summer, 860 miles in total. The march was coordinated by the NAACP with the help of the Reformed Jewish Movement. And it is our hope to connect our local efforts here in Dallas to the national issues that our movement will be advocating for in the months to come. Stay tuned for ways that you can act in support of our movement's advocacy efforts. There is a story about Kivi Kaplan, a great Reformed Jewish activist and philanthropist who served as the president of the NAACP. Kaplan was on a trip in the South and was picked up at the airport by a black cab driver. The route took him along a road in a wealthy neighborhood lined with country clubs. And sign after sign said, "No Jews, no dogs." Kaplan remarked to the driver, "Can you believe that they just put it out there like that?" And the driver replied, "They don't even have to say no blacks." That's when Kivi decided he couldn't stand idly by, that he had to work to make a change. We have to begin with ourselves, to recognize the caves that we are in, to know that we didn't lay the foundations for the caves, we didn't carve the walls that separate us. But standing in the cave, unfazed and unmoved, we may become complicit in their very existence. It's time to step out and feel the clap of thunder and the heat of fire, and let the still small voice call out to our conscience to have moral imagination. Every time a person is hurt, every time a person is degraded, every time a person is discriminated against, every time justice is unfairly applied, we are all responsible. With God's strength, with the power of community, with the courage and conviction deep within us, we can be audacious in our spirit and bring greater healing to our parched cities and this great nation. May we do so as our tradition so powerfully demands of every generation. May we do so with solidarity, with courage, and resolve. Please join us as we pray for our country with the first paragraph on page 272. God of holiness, we hear your message. Justice you shall pursue. God of freedom, we hear your charge. Proclaim liberty throughout the land. Inspire us through your teachings and commandments to love and uphold our precious democracy. Let every citizen take responsibility for the rights and freedoms we cherish. Let each of us be an advocate for justice, an activist for liberty, a defender of dignity, and let us champion the values that make our nation a haven for the persecuted, a beacon of hope among the nations.